Alright, pause. Whatever you were doing before you clicked on this video, forget it, because what I'm about to walk you through is one of the most fascinating, frustrating, and honestly kind of heartbreaking situations playing out in women's sports right now. We're talking about Caitlin Clark, the woman who didn't just elevate the WNBA, she picked it up off the floor, dusted it off, and carried it on her back to a place this league has genuinely never been before. Sold-out arenas, record television deals, little girls in Indiana wearing number 22 jerseys. That is her doing. And right now, that same woman is sitting on a bench in the middle of a game her team just won, visibly going back and forth with her coaches, not once but twice in the same night, and then physically moving to a different seat because she needed space from the person trying to coach her. Let that picture sit with you for a second, because that is not drama for drama's sake. That is a signal, and I think it is worth taking seriously. I'm going to walk you through everything, the game, the press conferences, the body language, the history, all of it, because this story goes a lot deeper than one sideline argument and a few viral clips. So stay with me, because this is where it gets real. It was May 17th, 2026. Indiana Fever against the Seattle Storm. The Fever win convincingly, 89-78. Caitlin Clark goes off for 21 points and 10 assists, and in doing so, she breaks the WNBA record for the most career games with at least 20 points and 10 assists, passing a record previously held by Courtney Vanderloot. On paper, that is a beautiful night. That is a historic night. The kind of night where, after the final buzzer, everyone in that building should be celebrating what they just witnessed. But someone in the crowd had their phone out during the game, and what they caught on camera told a completely different story. There is Caitlin Clark on the bench, locked in what looks unmistakably like a heated argument with assistant coach Brienne January. And it does not de-escalate the way sideline exchanges usually do. It gets more intense. Clark visibly pushes back, her emotions written all over her face, and then she does something that nobody could miss or misinterpret. She gets up and moves seats. She physically relocates herself on that bench, so she is no longer sitting next to the woman coaching her. You can dress that up however you want. You can call it competitive frustration, you can say athletes do this all the time, and maybe some of that is true. But moving seats is not an accident. Moving seats is a decision. And decisions like that during a game the team is winning tell you something about what is happening underneath the surface. Now here is what reportedly started it. January, who handles Indiana's defensive assignments and has every right to do exactly this, was walking Clark through a defensive coverage, breaking down a sequence, doing her job. And something about that exchange did not land well with Clark at all. That much is obvious from the footage. Now, I want to be fair here because Brienne January is not some random hire who stumbled into this role. She is a former WNBA champion. She has credentials. She has earned the right to coach at this level. And by most accounts, her relationship with Clark is not some cold professional standoff. Earlier this year, Clark was reposting January's Instagram content, laughing along with a clip of her running kids through defensive drills in London. There is warmth between them. There is real history. But there is also clearly something unresolved simmering just below the surface of that warmth. And on May 17th, it broke through in front of everyone. And here is the detail that really shifts this from a one-off moment into something more significant. That argument with January was not the first tense exchange Caitlin Clark had that evening. Earlier in the same game, she had a separate disagreement with head coach Stephanie White, this one about positioning and defensive coverage. Two separate arguments with two different coaches on the same bench on the same night in a game they won by 11 points. Think about that for a moment. This is not a team falling apart in a blowout loss. This is not panic setting in during a pressure moment. This is friction rising to the surface during a comfortable victory. And that tells me the frustration is not about the scoreboard. It is about something deeper that has been building for a long time. To really understand where things stand right now, you have to go back just 2 days before the Storm game to a Friday night in Indiana on May 15th. The Fever are hosting the Washington Mystics, and this game nearly sends the home crowd into full cardiac arrest. The Mystics build a 9-point lead going into the fourth quarter, and by every reasonable measure, Indiana looks cooked. And then Caitlin Clark happens. She catches fire in a way that feels less like basketball and more like watching someone decide through sheer will that the night is going to end differently. 5 3-pointers in the fourth quarter. 17 of the team's 31 points in that final period. All by herself, erasing the deficit and forcing overtime. The crowd is absolutely losing its mind. The building is electric. This is exactly the kind of moment that gets highlighted on every sports channel in the country for weeks. She finishes with 32 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds. Indiana loses 104-102 in overtime. And then Stephanie White walks to the press conference podium. A reporter asks her directly, specifically, about Caitlin Clark leading that fourth quarter surge. The question could not have been more pointed. And White responds by talking about the team. She never says Clark's name. She doesn't look into that camera and acknowledge what her star player just did. She pivots. She deflects toward the collective, and she moves on. Now look, in isolation, that could be chalked up to coaching philosophy. Some coaches genuinely believe in always emphasizing the team above the individual. But this was not isolation. The internet recognized it instantly because they have seen it before. The reaction was immediate, and it was loud. One fan wrote that it felt pathological at this point, the way specific questions about Clark keep getting redirected somewhere else. Another pointed out that it happens after close losses, after big performances, after the exact moments when the most natural and human thing would be to just say out loud that your player was extraordinary tonight. And what struck me watching all of it was this. Even the analysts and commentators who were trying to pump the brakes and contextualize the situation kept having to acknowledge that something was genuinely off. WNBA analyst Rachel Da addressed it on her podcast, trying to frame the bench argument as something that happens in professional sports all the time, which is true, but then she herself pointed to the press conference behavior as fueling the fire among fans. When the people defending you have to lead with, "I know people are frustrated," before explaining why everything is fine, that is not actually a defense. That is a confirmation. This tension has a longer history than just this week, and it matters to understand that. Go back to September 2025, the playoffs, first round series against the Atlanta Dream. Clark is injured and watching from the bench in street clothes, but she is still absolutely plugged in emotionally, fired up on every possession, living and dying with every call. At one point, a video surfaces of both Clark and teammate Sophie Cunningham completely ignoring Brienne January as she tries repeatedly to get them to sit down and stop going after the referees. January motions once. They keep going. She tries again. They keep going. Eventually, she gets them seated, but they continue to make their feelings known toward the officials. Now, a lot of Clark fans saw that clip and loved it. That is the fire. That is the competitiveness. That is why she is who she is. And I understand that reaction completely. But there is another way to look at it too. A former WNBA champion, a professional coach, being visibly ignored by players she is responsible for coaching multiple times in front of a national audience. That does not disappear. That plants something. And what gets planted in September 2025 can absolutely be growing on a bench in May 2026. Caitlin Clark's body language around this coaching staff has become its own conversation at this point because the cameras catch everything. You have probably seen the clip. She hits one of her signature deep step-back threes, the kind that brings an entire arena to its feet, and then she turns toward the bench and gives Stephanie White what can only be described as the most reluctant high five you have ever seen in professional basketball. It lasts about half a second. There is no eye contact. There is no shared moment. It is a transaction, the absolute minimum acknowledgement required, and then she is already moving on. That is not two people celebrating together. That is a player managing a relationship. And the difference between those two things is enormous when you're trying to build a championship team. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, because nothing about this is simple, and I do not think it should be treated as simple. Stephanie White is not some overmatched coach who stumbled into the Indiana job and got lucky. In 2025, without Caitlin Clark for the majority of the season due to injury, she led the Fever to a 24-20 record. That is the most regular season wins in franchise history. Indiana won the WNBA Commissioner's Cup. They advanced to the semifinals. Stephanie White won Coach of the Year. She earned that. You cannot take those accomplishments away from her and pretend they do not exist. She is a good basketball coach. But here's the question that matters more than whether she is a good coach in the abstract. Is she the right coach for Caitlin Clark specifically? Because those are genuinely two different questions, and confusing one for the other is how you end up watching a franchise underperform with arguably the most talented player in the league on their roster. The core tension that has never been fully resolved is this. Stephanie White coaches defense first, collective basketball. She distributes responsibility across the roster. She is a system coach. Caitlin Clark, at her absolute peak, is a player who should have the ball in her hands on nearly every critical possession. She is a playmaker, a shooter, an offensive engine. The conversation about whether she should be playing on or off the ball has been dragging on since White took over, and Clark herself got visibly fed up with it during a media session this season. When reporters came back to that same topic again, she pushed back sharply, saying something along the lines of, "You all have two favorite questions, what I wore to practice and me playing off-ball basketball." That is not someone who has found peace with the conversation. That is someone who is tired of a debate that feels like it should have already been settled. And look, Clark herself actually demonstrated publicly that this situation is layered in all directions, because when USA Basketball announced that Stephanie White would be joining the staff as an assistant coach for the WNBA World Cup in Berlin this September, Clark shared the Fever's congratulatory post on her own Instagram story. She showed public support. She did not have to do that. Nobody forced her hand. But the fan reaction was volcanic. Comments flooding in about White not deserving the recognition, about her being the wrong person for the job, about what her presence on the national team stage means. And while those comments were from fans, not from Clark herself, the fact that a coaching appointment triggered that kind of immediate and sustained outrage from the most passionate fan base in women's basketball tells you something about the relationship between that fan base and the coaching staff. There is also this moment from the 2025 season that I think about a lot when people try to paint this situation as purely adversarial. During a dominant Fever win over Las Vegas, White drew a technical foul for going at the referees. And Clark on the bench absolutely erupted with joy. She was lit up, laughing, visibly proud of her coach for having that kind of fire, that kind of competitive edge. That is real. That is genuine warmth breaking through in a spontaneous, unscripted moment. And it is a reminder that this is not a situation where two people simply despise each other. This is messier than that. It is the kind of friction that comes from two people who have real respect for each other in certain moments, but cannot seem to align on the things that matter most. And then there is the World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, just 2 months before all of these May arguments. Clark leads Team USA to a perfect 5-0 record. She averages 11.6 points and a tournament-high 6.4 assists per game. She is named Tournament MVP. And Stephanie White is on that same staff, helping run the operation. They won together. Clark was brilliant. White contributed to the environment where that brilliance was on full display. So the relationship clearly works under certain conditions. But those conditions apparently do not always translate back to Indiana, and figuring out why is where this whole thing gets genuinely fascinating. I think the most honest explanation, the one that cuts through all the noise, is that the Indiana Fever as an organization has not fully committed to what it actually means to build around a once-in-a-generation player. And I want to be careful here, because that is a heavy statement. But think about what it would look like if they had. It would mean the offensive structure is unambiguously centered on Clark. It would mean the coaching staff is publicly and enthusiastically celebrating her historic performances without having to be pushed into it by direct press conference questions. It would mean that the off-ball versus on-ball debate gets settled once and for all in a way that actually serves her best basketball. None of those things appear to have